A little disclaimer just to throw out there before we get into these videos is everything that I'm going to talk about in this video series is specific to my rebuild kits. If you're getting your parts from other places, the information that I'm giving you may not correlate, and so it is very important that this is specific to my recipe using the rebuild kits that I sell. If you guys are interested in those rebuild kits, you can check them out at the website here below, www.getloganbuilt.com. All right, enough talking, let's jump into this stuff. Okay, so now on to our direct drum assembly. We've cleaned everything really good. When you're cleaning this, you want to make sure the tabs where the steel's right in are good and cleaned out. Make sure you don't have a bunch of fuzz in here. Sometimes blow it out with some air if you need to. And then just like the reaction plates, I like to always have a nice clean surface to start with for a new band. And so I'll take that red Scotch-Brite pad and I'll run around the surface of this, scuff it all really good, and then you're going to want to check this to make sure it's nice and flat. If you feel a wave in this thing, then you actually need to replace this drum, because if this thing is not perfectly flat, then it will eventually wear the band and give you a premature band failure. This one's in really good shape. We've got it nice and scuffed up. You're also looking for heat marks on this as well. If you've got a bunch of really bad heat spots, good chance you probably need to replace the drum as well. So, next thing we're going to do is we need to put our lip seals on the apply piston here. One goes on the outside, and then a lip seal goes on the inside of the drum here. Now there's a couple different seals that are in your kit. There's two seals that are going to look very similar, but the larger one is for the overdrive apply piston, so you don't want to use that one. You could tell by looking at it that it's not correct for it, but I have seen some guys try to force this in here and have issues, so make sure that you are using the correct size seal for this. And then on the inner seal, you're actually going to use this seal that's in the package here. There are two seals that are going to come with your kit, and one is an older style seal. This is a new retro style seal. It has a larger lip area than the older style one, and it does a better job of sealing the apply piston, and so it does a better job keeping the line pressure nice and high in the direct clutch. So you're going to want to make sure that you use both of the correct seals here. And then, as always, we're going to want to dip these in transmission fluid, make sure they're good and lubed up. Now, just like the forward piston, we're going to want to put the lip facing the back side here, which is the way that the fluid is coming on to apply the piston, so we can capture the fluid and make sure that it is nice and sealed up. You want to make sure that the seal is all the way in the groove. It's not rolled or twisted or any problems. And then now we can do the inner seal. Now the inner seal is a little trickier because it's easier to roll. So you want to make sure that this gets installed nice and flat. And the easiest way to do that is I'll just stretch it and I'll start one side into the groove here, and then I'll try to maintain it like this the whole way. I don't like to roll it in there, just to be sure that you don't accidentally end up with one side installed like that and you put it together and then it blows out the first time that it has pressure applied to it. And then, just like the pump seal, I always go around these and make sure that it feels good and it feels like it's not rolled. And because we have these lubed up with transmission fluid already, this is basically ready to go in. When you put this apply piston in, you want to try to put it in as nice and as level as possible. And you should not have to force it. If you have to force it, the lip seal is hanging up. You just put it in, line it up on the tabs, and just give it a nice little wiggle back and forth. Apply a little bit of pressure down on it, and when it pops in, it'll thud like that, and now it's good to go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it up for our return springs. This is a full functioning valve body, So we're going to run the original 9 return springs. So we're going to do 3, skip 2, 3, skip 2, and then 3. So that way we keep this all nice and even. So when this piston applies, it has even spring pressure on it. If you're doing a full manual valve body, you'll actually want to add 3 more springs to this and do 12 springs. And then when we get into the clutch clearance, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Okay, now we've got our 9 return springs in. You can see that they're evenly spread. And now we can take our retainer and set it on the top. Now you're going to want to make sure that all of the springs go behind the lip on this retainer. Make sure you don't have a spring hanging out, because when you press it in there, it'll try to shoot it out the side of there. So now let's take this over to the press and press this back on the same way we took it off. Alright, we've got the drum over here on the press, ready to go. You're going to want to make sure that you put the snap ring in and just set it on top of the retainer here. And make sure that it's orientated in a way that you can get to it with your snap ring pliers. Then you're going to take your 4-inch piece of exhaust tubing, or whatever it is that you're using to press this in. My preference is this. Put your plates back on the top, and then run your jack down close. Okay, I always like to center this up as best as possible. It makes it easiest for the retainer to go on. Now, just like when we took the retainer out, we want to make sure that it doesn't slip into the snap ring groove. And if you try to keep pressing it down with it in the snap ring groove, it's going to bend that retainer and it's going to screw it up, and you're going to have to buy a new one. So I just hold the tool here, keep it nice and centered. Make sure it makes it past the retainer. The retainer makes it past the groove nicely, just like it did there. Now we can take our, oh my, blooper. Now we can take our snap ring pliers. We can reach into our window here, and I like to hold the back side of the snap ring with my left hand, just kind of orientate it off to the side here. Hold the back side with my left hand, spread it open, push the back side in with my fingers, and then push it in. Boom, snap ring is in. Now we can release our press. Drum is now reassembled, and now we can put it over there on the bench and start putting the clutch pack back in it. So now we're ready to install our clutch pack. If this is a 47 RE, you're going to be able to do a 5 clutch direct clutch pack. If it's a 48 like we have here, you'll be able to do a 6 clutch. And that is just because the way the drum is machined, it's a little taller in here, and it can hold 6 clutches, as to where a 47 can only hold 5. But that is no problem at all. You can easily make well beyond 1,000 horsepower on 5 clutch packs, so don't get too hung up on that. Just know that if you do have a 47, you'll be dealing with 5 clutches, and a 48, you'll be dealing with 6. On the 47, you'll be using 4 thin steels and then 1 thicker steel. So you'll have 70 thousandths thick steels, you'll have 4 of those, and then you'll have 1 85 thousandths thick steel at the top, typically. Because these are all machine parts, there's always a little bit of variance between what you have, and typically you can change the selective snap ring to get it right with that stack up, but this is where you do kind of have to play with steel thicknesses as well as snap rings to get this direct clutch pack where you need it, because this clutch pack is pretty important on the clearance. So on the 48 drum here, we're going to start by putting a 70 thousandths steel in the bottom. If you're using thin steels, or if you're using any thick steels at all, I like to put the thick steels up here at the top, because that's where it's going to take the most heat, and thick steels do a better job of taking more heat. I'm personally a fan of thick steels and less clutches over thin steels and more clutches. So just like before, we've soaked our clutches for at least 30 minutes, and you can see here that this is a different tooth count than that forward clutch on the 48. If you're building a 47, then your forward clutches are going to be the exact same as this. So we're just going to do a steel clutch, which is opposite of how we did the forwards. The forwards already had a reaction plate in the bottom, and then you would do a clutch steel. But this is important that you install a steel first, and then a clutch. And then we're just going to go steel clutch until we've got all of them stacked up. So once we've installed our 6 steels and our 6 clutches, now it's time to put the reaction plate in. Just like before, you want to make sure you take a Scotch-Brite pad to this reaction plate, make sure it's good and clean, and this is where you're really going to want to pay attention to hot spotting or any major defects, possibly warping. This reaction plate here has a big job. It has to apply this clutch pack, and basically it's stopping the apply of this clutch pack. And so if this thing is not perfectly flat, if it has any hot spot defects at all, it can affect the performance of that clutch pack. So you want to make sure that you have a good one. If you don't have a good one, then this is one of those things that you need to order one. And I do not like to run a stepped reaction plate. On lower horsepower stuff, it's typically okay, but anytime you're machining thickness away from this, you're taking away holding capacity, and you're taking away the capacity of heat in which this can handle. So I like to run this at stock thickness. The other thing you got to watch out for too is if you machine this thing down a lot, and now you have clutches that are really high up in the pack here, it can come unsplined from the planetary setup. So I always like to set these up using a stock size reaction plate. And so I'm going to start by putting the 60 thousandths snap ring in here. My guess is that's probably going to get us right where we need to be. We're shooting for 80 to 85 thousandths clutch clearance on this. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. If it's 78 thousandths, that's typically okay. If it's 87 thousandths, that's typically okay as well. But if it's like 75 thousandths or 90 thousandths, then you need to change your selective snap ring or change a steel stack up to get it in the correct tolerance. This tolerance here is pretty important because there's no roller clutch between second and third gear. So if you have this set up too tight, you'll have a 2-3 bind where second gear will still be applied while third gear clutch pack is coming on, and 2 gears are mechanically applied together, and it'll feel like the truck is nosing over. And then if you have this set up too loose, then it will actually flare. So the second gear band will come off before the direct clutch pack comes on, and it'll free rev the engine. So that 80 to 85 thousandths is where you need to be. And keep in mind, this is very specific to this rebuild kit that we're discussing, using the gear and valve body, the 3.8 lever ratio, and the way we set the servo up. Okay, so now to measure for the clearance. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. You can stick a feeler gauge in here between the snap ring and the reaction plate, or you can actually set up a dial indicator and then you could pick up on it. All of those ways work. I'm not a fan of feeler gauges anytime I don't have to use them, just because I feel like they're subjective. Somebody might feel like, oh yeah, this is perfect, and I might think it's a little loose. Somebody else might think that it's a little tight. I might think it's perfect. So I like to do things based off of numbers. And so the way that I like to do it is I'll actually take a pick and I'll wedge it in here between the snap ring groove and the reaction plate. And what this does is this pushes down on the clutch pack. And so this, in my mind, is simulating as close to as we can of this pack actually being applied. Because when this is applied with force, these clutches are going to squish and fluid's going to come out. So just picking it up by hand or just running a feeler gauge in there, I think, leaves some margin of error. So we know that this is a 60 thousandth snap ring because we measured for that. So now I put my base of my calipers on the snap ring, make sure that it's nice and square, nice and flat, and then I will run these down to the reaction plate and record that number. So that's 142 thousandths. So we're going to subtract 60 thousandths from that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is 82 thousandths. That is exactly where we want this clutch pack to be. And then just to be certain, I will actually do this in 3 places. I'll do it equidistantly from each other, and then basically use the average from that. But if it's anything between 80 and 85 thousandths, we're golden. This one's 82 thousandths, so after I double check this, I'll measure it and make sure, but as long as it stays at 82 thousandths, this is an ideal direct clutch setup. If this was a little bit too loose, then we could take a selective snap ring and we could trade out this 60 thousandths for a 70 thousandths. We could put an 80 thousandths in there, and then there's even a 90 thousandth snap ring as well. So the direct clutch, it's very easy to set up. It just takes the most time because this is the clutch that absolutely matters the most. So now we have the direct clutch done. We've got the input assembly done with the forward clutch, and we've got the front pump done. So before we end this video, let me show you guys how you can air test these before you actually put them in the case. Alright, so you're going to grab your converter from your kit here. You're going to pull the snout cover off of it, and then we're going to put the direct drum on the input shaft. The clutch is splined to the input, so you might have to rotate it back and forth a little bit until they go all the way down. You'll know when it splines up all the way because you'll hear a nice thud. A 5 clutch seems to be a little bit easier to spline up than a 6 clutch, because that 6 clutch just seems to always give you a little bit of trouble. Alright, so you heard it click in there. Now we've got that completely seated. So now what we will do is we will take our pump and make sure if you still have the bolts in it, take these 2 bolts out. And now we're going to seat our pump down into the converter here. And then once again, you're going to turn this until it's all the way down. Watch your fingers, because if your finger's under here, it will get you. Alright, now it's all the way in. Makes a nice thud when it's in. Now this part is a little bit more difficult, but you're going to keep this assembly together. Basically, hold it like this, and this is where you're going to smash your fingers again. Slide the input shaft down in here. Turn it. Hold the direct drum up so it doesn't come off spline. Okay, it's all the way in. So now we have this basically put together exactly like it will be installed in the case. And now what this allows us to do is to put air pressure to these ports to check and make sure that the forward clutch pack is applying, the direct clutch pack is applying, and we can actually check the lockup clutch in the converter as well. So now we'll take a rubber tip air gun, and I have the shop pressure about 100 psi. When we check this thing all in the case, I like to check it at full shop air, 150 psi, so that way we get it as close to realistic as line pressure goes. But you don't want to go too crazy here because you'll see that the forward clutch really likes to jump out of there, so you got to be careful. So the first hole here is going to be your direct clutch. So you can hit that. Our direct clutch is sealing up good. The next hole next to that is our forward clutch. Now you want to be very careful with this hole because you don't want to give it much pressure at all, or this whole assembly will be shooting up. So watch, I just barely give it a little bit. You can see that it's applying that. You can put your hand on it. You can see that we have really good apply on that. And then your third one is your converter check, if you want to check your lockup clutch, but if you're going to do that one, you'll need to fill it with some oil. It won't really air check very well without oil being in it, and so we're not going to do this on this new converter here. So now we can disassemble all of this stuff the same way we took it out, or put it in, I should say. We'll leave this like this, set it off to the side, pull our pump back out, Set it off to the side. Slide the converter out of the way. And now all of this stuff is ready to go assembled into the transmission. So that's going to do it for this video. On the next one, we'll get into the 1 through 3 planetary gear set, as well as assembling the overdrive gear set. And then we'll be ready to start putting all this stuff back in the case. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.